well, Mark, and obviously the realignment wheel keeps spinning, and we'll talk about that later on in the show. But just in terms of what USC fans are really focused on, it's preseason camp, and I think the first and foremost thing on the defensive line, like the coaches, you don't want to talk up a group too much when you're in USC's situation where the defense really needs to prove it on the field on Saturdays this fall. But you also, if you think you have a better situation, like you don't want to exactly ignore it, push it under the rug. You don't want to sell players short. You want to note progress if it exists. You want to note, good developments if they exist. And so, without trying to oversell anything, the USC defensive coaches, like including rush end coach Roy Manning, and this is from the reportage of 247 Sports. The guys at 247 do a great job covering USC. They think they have more bodies. They think they have more depth. They think they have more quality. They think they have more options in terms of being able to rush the passer, in terms of being able to make an impact on the defensive front, and also just at the rush end position specifically. So they really do think that there's more depth and more quality just a week and a half before the start of the season. So that has to make USC fans look good. And I think that's actually a good point of emphasis, that instead of getting, falling in love with one guy, like the USC fan base would love to see Corey Foreman be the guy, and you'd love to see certain players step up, but it's less about the individual player, right? It's more about the unit. It's more about the team. It's more about the overall result. If Corey Foreman doesn't do it, Romello Height might do it. And Romello Height, that's a particular story. Like, he's healthy. He's getting noticed in camp. He's been working on techniques and how he hones his craft and polishes his game as a rush end. So that right there, like, that's really good news. That's a tangible addition, not so much, in terms of, adding him to the roster in the offseason, but just, when you get an injured player back, someone who didn't play last year, you get him back this year healthy. That is like adding a player, essentially. And that is one of the things that, if you've watched Tim Prangley and Rick Anaya on Trojan Conquest Live every Sunday here at the Voice of College Football, that's something that they've talked about. It's something I've been mentioning as well, that there were so many players like Zion Branch, Damani Jackson. You could go through the roster, find other examples. Players injured last year weren't able to play extensively, and that factored into the lack of depth which bit the Trojans in the backside at the end of the season in the Pac-12 championship game and also in the Cotton Bowl. So it really, like, it's not sunshine pumping, just trying to find something positive when the reality of the situation isn't as good. It's not sunshine pumping, I think, to say that USC has more bodies, that USC does have more depth. But I think, where the word of caution comes in is, don't be too sold on this player or that individual. It's more about, okay, this coaching staff, Alex Grinch, Sean Nua, the rest of the defensive brain trust, they have more pieces they can play with. They have more pieces they can move around. And that goes into one of the big themes of the offseason, is that with this gentle ramp up, with a soft, mushy first 6 games of the year before that nasty back-ended schedule, this coaching staff, this defensive roster will have time to ramp up. It will have time to identify who's the best fit at each position in each role. It's not as though it has to be locked down in week 1 or week 2. No, you have a schedule which is conducive toward experimentation, giving players lots of chances in different spots for varying snap counts. And the key is, find your formula, find your depth chart, find your hierarchy by October 14th in South Bend against Notre Dame. So saying that USC has more depth, it's not sunshine pumping. Like, that seems to be a pretty solid, reliable truth right now at USC preseason camp. And that is something which definitely should make USC fans happier. But, in terms of promising that certain guys are going to step forward, that's where we get into, that's where we need to put up the caution flag. But just having more options, like maybe this avenue that we hope for doesn't work out, but someone else could fill that need and fit that bill. So that's a very optimistic note from preseason camp at USC.
Yes. Sometimes Matt and I will reference the halogen days of our youth and watching college football in the early to mid 80s. And that's when you decided these are 4 defensive linemen and we're going to wear them out. They're going to play every down. And, that's the starting 4, looking at the NFL at the time, that was the days of the doomsday defense and the steel curtain and the purple people eaters and the fearsome foursome. And all these 4 guys, they play every down. They play the entire time. No. And at some point it was determined, okay, you can go to the second grade of player who's almost as good and you keep them fresh and you keep them going. And now we see really everybody, but certainly the elite teams come at you in waves and waves of players. And that's a benefit, not just in game keeping players fresh and over the season keeping players fresh, but it's also a safeguard in recruiting, that if you recruit in waves, you're going to have some misses. Therefore, hey, if you've got a defensive line room rotation of 8 or 9, and 6 or 7 are really good, and a couple didn't pan out the way you would have liked, well, you're still extremely strong.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. I would note, though, that in this particular season, given the dynamics and the nuances of the schedule, that point about freshness is extra important this year because of, and it's worth mentioning again one more time before we kick this thing off on August 26th against San Jose State. 9 straight games, 9 straight weekends with a game, week 4 through 12. It will be important to rotate bodies. It will definitely be important, not just to make decisions based on who's playing better, but even if someone's playing better, the coaching staff cannot overload specific players with too many responsibilities, at least if they have the chance. We get into week 5. That would be against Colorado on September 30, or it's game 5. That'd be, yeah. So you have game 5 against Colorado on September 30th, and you have, a bunch of, 4 guys on the defensive line who are just hitting it out of the park, who are doing an awesome job, and you have a 38-7 lead in the third quarter. You need to yank those guys, even if they're playing great and they're absolutely crushing everybody. No, you need to pull them out, so that they're not getting too many snaps. You need to give the backup some work, and you need to make sure that everyone is fresh for the gauntlet. Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, Oregon, 4 games in 5 weeks against elite high-end competition. So, that, like one of the great things about this season, I mean, great in the sense of, interesting and being a revealer of just how professional this coaching staff proves to be, just how on the ball it is or isn't. Like, we're going to learn how good this staff is in terms of allocating the snap counts, provided that, USC has enough of a lead that it becomes a possibility. Obviously, if it's just a 7-point game in the third quarter, you can't really play around as much as you'd want. But if USC is leading by 24, 27, 30 points midway through the third quarter, of those games that it should dominate, against ASU on the September 23rd, against Colorado September 30th, and against Arizona on October 7th, this coaching staff will need to be rotating people in and out, so that 9-game stretch getting into the middle and back end of October on into early November, so that the fuel tank is full for the most important moments of this USC season. It's going to be fascinating to watch.